So making the big bolete with the really big stem is a little tricky. I made one off camera as practice, so I'll show you how to do it quick. So what I do is I took the stem. You can see I already sanded it off a little bit. That wasn't enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my nippers here, my flush cutters, and cut around the outside of the stick to trim it more so that it's easier to push this stick into the green stuff without totally disrupting the green stuff. There we go. So that's probably good enough. So you can see I've chewed up the end of that pretty well. Then I'm going to take a little bit of sandpaper. I'm going to quick go around it just to smooth it off. Get rid of any parts that are sticking up. There we go. So that's a much better, more rounded piece of stick. And then I decided not to use my the little cap thing. So I just put this here, put a little water on my hand first. All right, take the stick. See how my hand deforms as I push it in? That will help the mushroom stay more or less mushroom shaped. And there we go. So now the only thing I have to do is work that crease from my palm out of there. So once again, I get the little wet Teflon doobie. If you don't have these, you should probably pick them up. They're inexpensive, and if you ever thought you might be doing green stuff work, they're invaluable. They come as a set in different shapes. I use this one the most because I'm not really a good sculptor and I'm impatient, and this is the big flat one that allows me to do the most damage with the least amount of time. And there we go. And that is very bolete looking. The fact that you've got this cap that is just a little bit bigger than this massive stem. Here's a quick little video on how to use a rotary tool, and this could be something fancy like my Fordham, which is a jewelry making tool in essence, or it could be as simple as a drill. All you got to do is take something that spins, clamp it down so it doesn't move, and then you can turn it on. You know, in this case, because I have a Fordham, I have a foot pedal, which leaves my hands free, so I can control the spin with my foot, which is very handy. But you could just, as long as your drill has got a lock on setting, you can just start the drill, lock it in the on position, and then use it the same way. And it basically turns any drill into a lathe that spins your little gizmo around, and then you can use files on it just like you would on a real lathe with the big lathe tools, which are more like chisels and files. This is a technique that I learned actually for making jewelry, so obviously it works with metals very well. So if you have a spear handle or something that you want to decorate. Now, I don't think it would work very well with gaming material, model material like metals, because the force would just make it bend as it spun around. But you could take a piece of brass wire, I've done this before, and decorate the brass wire using the lathe, and then use that as the handle of your spear, for example. But anyway, I'm going to use it today for making mushrooms. I've talked too much, so I'm just going to do this really quickly. I get it going, and I use the file to round it, and this is just the part that's going to go into the green stuff. So I want it rounded so it pushes in easy enough. So we'll start there. Look at that, that's nice. You can see it's not perfectly, when I roll it, you can see it's not perfectly flat. If I wanted to, I can use the file to help alleviate that a little bit, but I don't really care. And then for these boletes, this is the the Satan's bolete. I need a fat little stem, and so I'm just going to start right below where the cap is going to attach, and I push the edge of this triangular file in, and look at that, I get this nice little groove, which is great. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to roll it down. And there I have a nice curve to the top of my stem, and I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom. Now these are short, fat stem mushrooms, so I'm going to dig in a little bit. Note that you don't have to push the file. I just do it a little bit because it helps to clear the sawdust and stuff away from the file. So there we go. There's, in seconds, I have made a stem for a bolete just with one file, and if I think it's a little too rough, then I take one of my little fine little needle files. And the main purpose of that is just to take the texture off from grinding on the heavier files. Last but not least, I want to build a pin into this little thing, so I don't have to worry about adding a pin to it. So in this case, I have a little square file. I'm going to set it up. I'm just going to kind of find the spot. There we go. Look at that. Instant pin. So there we are. I've just got that little bit of extra on the bottom. Nobody would probably notice that, but just for argument's sake, I'm going to take my round file and maybe I'll take the square file. Get rid of that. Have to be careful, I'm taking a lot off of my pin. There we are. So, in a matter of 2 minutes, I have made, pardon me while I move the camera around, get it focused, I have made a little bolete stem that looks just like the real thing. There we are, sorry. Camera's in the clamp. There, look at that. Little bolete stem. All I got to do is make a wad of green stuff, smash it on the top, and I'll leave this part on so that I can handle it and paint it without actually touching the mushroom. And then when I'm ready, I'll just clip it off at the bottom of the pin and stuff it in something, and I'm good to go. Here we are trying to put the finishing touches on a Rubroboletus satanas, or a fungi called Satan's bolete. What I've decided to do with this particular one, now these are associated with oak and beech, and I did take a couple of the other ones I had and put them by some big oak trees that I have, or at least I'm claiming they're oaks. They look like oaks to me. And then I put a couple in the grass so I could put them near a tree, but I wanted to, again, make a little standalone scene out of this one. So what I did is I took one of my ferns, I dressed it up a little bit by highlighting it with whatever GW is calling their light green right now. I guess it's this, the mood green. And then I washed it with camo shade, which I have become very fond of. I like this. And that's it. That's all I did. But it does make it look much better, much less plasticky. I'll hit it with one more shot of dull coat, and that should take the shine off it nicely. And then I have my bolete right here. There we go. So you could see the rounded stem. You could see where I just ground myself a pin, so I don't have to worry about that. And then here's a little piece of turf. I'm going to put them on. I think I'm going to put the fern on the big part with this. Now I didn't cut this, but since this piece is cut, it's a little flat here. So I'll have that over here. So I'll put the bolete over here and I'll put the fern over here, and they should make a nice little tandem. And okay, the priming is done. I just did kind of a quick 2-second job on it. I want to do this in a couple of layers. These do have a white cap, but it's kind of an ugly white cap. It's lumpy and the white isn't really consistent. So I'll just do a couple of quick layers and call it good. And while this is drying, and you can see I put it in a pair of clamping pliers. This is another one of those tools I'm going to introduce you to that is a holdover from my jewelry making days. They are incredible. They, let's see, there we go. As you squeeze them, unlike normal tweezers that close when you squeeze them, these open when you squeeze them, so you can use them to hold things while they're drying, and it is really handy. Okay, the second coat of paint is drying, and I hit the fern with a little bit of dull coat to take the shine off it, so that is drying as well. What I figured out with the easiest way to cover something with that's the blended turf, this scenic blended turf, which is what I prefer, is I just put a little white glue on there. And then, now this is going to be hard to do on camera, so please forgive me if you end up seeing my hand more than anything, is I just hold it and I take my finger and I just kind of smash the glue around, and I'm not too careful about where the glue goes and where it doesn't go. And that's kind of the idea, is I want the turf to be attached to this in a random way, and then I just poured the turf out into the lid, flip it upside down, and push it down. And then I can pull it out almost immediately and roll it. And in spite of dropping it and rolling it and doing all this, I get a nicely covered piece of turf right there. Right now the paint's dry. However, the mushroom's a little bit too white. Like I said, the boletes are kind of, there aren't many pretty boletes. I'll just put it that way. So what I'm going to do is I have a little gray wash. This is made by Vallejo. You could do just as well by putting a light gray and mixing it up until it's mostly liquid. And all I'm going to do is slather it on to dirty up the cap a little bit. All right, that's dry and we're ready for paint. The only real color on this mushroom besides the white of the cap is the stem, and the stem is just a unbelievable blood red. Sometimes it's a little white at the bottom. Sometimes it's red all the way down. I'm just going to paint this red all the way down. So I just have a very bright red, which is true to most of the photographs that I've seen. And I'm going to go over this once. Now that's kind of, and we're going to let that dry. And then I'm going to hit it again with the red, and then I'm going to hit it with the orange. Ready for a second coat of red. Again, the photographs of this, it's just screaming. I'm using the tweezers here just to help me stop from putting my hand into the middle. There we go. There's the red. And while it's still wet, I'm going to add some orange because I want the orange to blend in a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of randomly put orange here and there around the stem. Flip it over. So I'm not really doing any kind of blending other than using wet paints. This isn't really wet blending because I'm not particularly trying to get them to blend together, but in essence that's what I'm doing, is I'm just letting the liquid nature of the paints make them combine, and that'll give us a little bit more of a varied surface. Also, when they combine, I'll touch up that little red spot on the cap. So everything looks good. But as you can see, this is going to be quite a showy mushroom. All right, the last step is to take some crimson wash or red, whatever you feel like. I like the darker color because I think it provides an interesting, almost a texture to the fungus. There we go. Now I'm going to let this dry upside down because I want the wash to gather underneath the cap. I'll get a little on my brush and go around the very bottom just to pull a little bit of that off, like so. And then we'll let that dry. The very last step is to go over it with some Art Goat or any gloss that you want. This is optional, but because fungi you usually see mushroom development after a rain because the fungi need the moisture, and it just, you know, it's one of those signals that the fungus uses to determine that it's time to reproduce. And I like the way it looks. However, you would be perfectly reasonable, or it would be perfectly reasonable to leave your fungi looking dry. So it just depends on what you like. There we go. Gloss coat's on. As soon as that dry, we will assemble our new little model. Right, we're ready for the final stage, that is assembling everything together. The gloss coat has dried enough anyway. I took a little piece of wood, or a little piece of cork, and using just a sharp implement of any type, I made, in effect, pilot holes for drilling. So I pushed these down in. The problem is cork heals, so you could push it down in, push it all the way through even, and the cork would seal up around it and make it difficult to work with. But I put one for the fern and one for this, and then I used my awesome, cool tool, rotary tool, and drilled the hole, so we're all set to go. So now I'm ready to put the fern on. So when I'm putting on flocking, I always use white glue. For some reason, I think that works better when you're trying to cover an area. However, when I'm putting individual bits and pieces on, I always use super glue. Don't ask me why, it's just the way I am. So I'm going to put this in, turn it to the way I want it, with that short leaf sticking out towards where the fungus will be. And then I'm actually pulling down on the wire because the wire is too long for the piece. And that allows me to kind of get this to set right. And then I will grab one of my little nippers and little flush cutters. These are handy. Another great tool, not just for cutting things off of sprues. And then I put that down, and there we are. Then I take my fungus, and the reason I leave this extra dowel on is so I have a handle to hold while I'm working with them. And I take my nippers yet again, and I'm going to flush cut the bottom there. There we go, there's our fungus. Now, I may need to enlarge this hole a little bit, but let's see if it fits. Sometimes, and it's a little tough, sometimes all you have to do is, see how that's kind of, I don't know if you can see that, bring it close, but that's kind of flat and wide. So I'm just going to take a file and make that a little bit more of a point and see if that's enough to make it go in. There it is. I don't even have to glue it. It's in there so tough. And look at that. So that's what it looks like from the side. Let me bring that up to you a little closer. Oh, would you look at that? It even focuses. Let's get the jet out of the way. That's my favorite super glue, by the way. I don't mind doing a promo. There we are. So there it is. There's a little mushroom in our fern growing out of this little hummock. And then we'll go take this over on the rotating table and we'll set it down and you can see what it looks like. And here we are with my full collection of Rubroboletus satanas. I had earlier made a batch, and the excuse me, the page I was reading up on them said they were often found in the presence of mature oaks. So I took the two biggest trees that I have in my terrain collection and put a couple directly on those bases. That one and that one. And then I had previously also made a little hummock, this one with a bunch of flowers. Some of them, you'll notice these, they're white on the bottom. Some of the examples, the red went all the way down to the base. Other ones, it kind of petered out before it got all the way down to the bottom. So the other ones I did a little differently than the one you saw me do. And then there's the little guy. Sorry, it's hard to figure out where my hand is when I'm reaching over the camera. So there it is. I actually think they look cooler with the red all the way down to the bottom. I may touch up some of the others, I may not. We'll see. But I like them. They're very cool. So yet another fungi added. A couple of new tricks to our inventory of tools, using the rototool as a lathe, which you can do with a regular old drill. There's no reason that you need to have an expensive jewelry making gizmo to use the same trick. And they look pretty sweet. And then not only was I able to shape the stem, but I was able to make a pin as part of the stem so that I could just poke them in. So there you go. Well, everyone, I think this is going to be shorter than the last one. My goal is to keep making them shorter until I get down to about 10 minutes, and then I think we'll be good. Thank you for joining me. Please remember to subscribe and comment and like. And thank you for joining us on Gizapalooza.